The rain stung Ezra's face as he stood outside the rusted gate of his childhood home in rural Ohio, the place that had spit him out like a bad seed 7 years ago. At 17, he'd been a lanky kid with dreams too big for the small town of Willow Creek. But his parents' rejection for being gay had carved a wound that still bled. Now, at 24, he was back not for love, but for something sharper, leverage. The old house looked smaller than he remembered, its peeling paint and sagging porch a testament to neglect. Ezra's fingers tightened around the envelope in his pocket, the contract that could change everything. He wasn't here to beg or reconcile. He was here to make them face the son they'd discarded. Ezra's twin brother, Ethan, had always been the golden child. Athletic, charming, straight everything their conservative parents, Margaret and Paul, valued. Growing up, Ezra had lived in Ethan's shadow, his quieter nature and love for books dismissed as soft. When Ezra came out at 16, it was Ethan who'd stood by him, whispering support in their shared bedroom late at night. But their parents, they'd called him an abomination, packed his bags, and pointed to the door. Ethan, torn and powerless, had stayed silent as Ezra left, tears streaming down both their faces. Now, Ezra was no longer the scared teenager who'd hitchhiked to San Francisco with $47 in his pocket. He'd clawed his way up, turning his knack for storytelling into a career as a screenwriter. His latest script, a raw, emotional drama about a queer kid finding his place in the world, had caught the eye of a major studio. The catch: the story was inspired by his life and his family's rejection. To move forward, he needed their signatures on a release form, a legal necessity since the script drew heavily from their shared history. Ezra pushed open the gate, the creak echoing like a warning. He hadn't seen his parents or Ethan since that night. Word had reached him through distant cousins that Ethan was still the pride of Willow Creek, now a local football coach, engaged to a nice girl from church. Ezra's success, meanwhile, had been met with silence until the studio's lawyer contacted his parents. And suddenly, they were eager to reconnect. The front door opened before he could knock. Margaret stood there, her face a mix of forced warmth and unease. "Ezra," she said, her voice thin. "You look, well." He didn't smile. "I'm not here for a reunion, Mom. I need you to sign something." Her eyes flickered to the envelope in his hand, and he saw the calculation behind them. Paul appeared behind her, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. "Come in, son," he said, as if the word hadn't been forbidden for years. Ezra stepped inside, the familiar smell of pine cleaner and old wood hitting him like a punch. The living room hadn't changed, same faded couch, same cross on the wall. Ethan wasn't there, and Ezra's chest tightened at the thought of facing him. Would his twin still look at him with guilt, or had time hardened him into their parents' mold? Margaret gestured to the couch. "Sit. We've missed you." Ezra stayed standing. "Let's not pretend. You need something from me now, don't you? My signature's worth more than your love ever was." Paul's face reddened, but Margaret cut in, her voice syrupy. "We were wrong, Ezra. We see that now. You've done so well for yourself. We're proud." The words were hollow, and Ezra's jaw clenched. "Proud? You threw me out. You told me I was dead to you." "We were scared," Margaret said, her hands twisting together. "We didn't understand. But we've changed. The church has a new pastor, and he's more open. We want you back in our lives." Ezra's laugh was sharp. "You want me back because my script's about to make millions, and you think you can cash in. I'm not here to fix your regrets. Sign the papers, and I'm gone." Paul's voice hardened. You owe us. Ezra. We raised you. Fed you. Gave you a roof. You gave me a roof until I told you who I am. Ezra shot back. Then you gave me a suitcase and a one-way ticket to nowhere. The argument escalated, voices rising until the front door swung open. Ethan stood there, his broad frame filling the space, his eyes locking onto Ezra's. For a moment, the room fell silent, the air thick with 7 years of unspoken words. Ethan looked older, his jaw sharper, but his eyes held the same warmth Ezra remembered from their late-night talks. Ezra, Ethan said, his voice breaking. You're really here. Ezra's throat tightened, but he kept his guard up. I'm not staying. I just need signatures. Ethan's gaze dropped to the envelope, then back to Ezra's face. Can we talk? Alone. Margaret started to protest, but Ethan silenced her with a look. Ezra hesitated, then nodded. They stepped onto the porch, the night air cool against Ezra's skin. Ethan leaned against the railing, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. I'm sorry, Ethan said quietly. I should have fought for you back then. I was a coward. Ezra wanted to lash out, to unleash years of hurt, but Ethan's sincerity stopped him. You were a kid, too, he said finally. We both were. I followed your career, Ethan admitted. Every article, every interview. You're incredible. Easy. I never stopped missing you. The words cracked something in Ezra, but he pushed it down. I didn't come here for this. I need you to sign the release. The script, it's about us. About what happened. Ethan's eyes widened. You wrote about all of it. Every ugly detail, Ezra said, his voice steady. And it's good. Good enough that they're begging for it. But I need your signature, too. Ethan nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. I'll sign. But easy. I want to make things right. Not just for the script. For us. Ezra looked away, the weight of his twins' words pressing against the walls he'd built. He didn't know if he could forgive, but for the first time, he wanted to try. The San Francisco skyline glittered through the window of Ezra's small apartment, a stark contrast to the claustrophobic memories of Willow Creek. He sat at his desk, the contract still unsigned, its edges worn from being carried back and forth. Ethan's words on the porch had lingered, stirring a restless hope Ezra wasn't ready to trust. He'd left Ohio without the signatures. His parents had stalled, insisting on family time to prove their change of heart. Ethan had been the only one willing to sign, but Ezra hadn't pressed him not yet. He needed time to untangle the knot of emotions his twins' apology had tied. Instead, he'd returned to the city, where his life felt like his own again, but the script's deadline loomed like a guillotine. Ezra's phone buzzed. A text from Javier, his best friend and occasional fling, who ran a queer community center in the Castro. Meet me at the center tonight. Got a surprise. Javier's easy charm had been Ezra's anchor since he'd arrived in San Francisco. Broke and broken. Their relationship was undefined moments of passion mixed with long stretches of friendship, but Javier was the one person Ezra trusted without question. The community center was alive when Ezra arrived, rainbow flags swaying above a crowd gathered for an open mic night. Javier spotted him, his warm brown eyes lighting up. You look like you just survived a war, he said, pulling Ezra into a hug. Feels like it, Ezra muttered, scanning the room. Drag queens mingled with poets, and a young trans kid nervously clutched a notebook, waiting for their turn on stage. This was home, more than Willow Creek ever had been. Javier led him to a quiet corner. So, Ohio. Spill. Ezra recounted the trip, the tension with his parents, Ethan's unexpected remorse. Javier listened, his hand resting lightly on Ezra's arm, grounding him. Sounds like your brother wants a second chance, Javier said. But what do you want? Ezra sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. I want the script done. I want to tell my story without their shadow over it. But Ethan, he's the only one I ever missed. Javier's smile was soft, knowing. Family's complicated. But you're stronger than their bullshit. Always have been. The open mic started, and Ezra watched as the trans kid took the stage, their voice trembling but fierce as they read a poem about reclaiming their identity. It hit Ezra hard, mirroring his own fight to define himself beyond his family's rejection. He thought of his script, the way it poured his pain onto the page, turning it into something beautiful. Later, as they walked through the Castro, Javier's hand brushed against his, a quiet invitation. Ezra hesitated, then laced their fingers together. You're too good to me, he said, half joking. Javier grinned. Someone's got to keep you from spiraling. Back at his apartment, Ezra opened his laptop, the script's final draft staring back at him. He'd written the main character, Caleb, as a version of himself, flawed, angry, but resilient. The twin, modeled on Ethan, was complex, loyal but complicit, yearning for redemption. Writing it had been cathartic, but now, with the signatures still missing, it felt like a story he couldn't finish. His phone lit up again. Ethan. Can I come to SF? Need to see you. Ezra's heart raced. He typed a reply, then deleted it. What did Ethan want? To sign the papers? To rebuild what they'd lost? Or was this just another way for his family to claw their way into his success? Ezra closed his laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He thought of Javier's hand in his, the community center's warmth, the life he'd built from nothing. Whatever Ethan's intentions, Ezra wouldn't let his past define his future. But the pull of his twin, the only person who'd ever truly known him, was harder to shake than he'd expected. Ethan arrived in San Francisco 2 days later, his duffel bag slung over one shoulder, looking out of place in his flannel shirt against the city's kaleidoscope of color. Ezra met him at a cafe in the Mission District, its walls covered in murals of queer icons. Ethan's eyes darted around, taking it all in, and Ezra wondered what his twin saw, a world he'd never understood, or one he envied. You came, Ezra said, stirring his coffee. Why? Ethan set his bag down, his hands fidgeting. I meant what I said in Ohio. I want to fix things. And I read your script. Ezra froze. He'd sent Ethan a draft on impulse, a reckless move he'd regretted instantly. How'd you get through it? He asked, his voice tight. It hurt, Ethan admitted. Seeing our lives like that, it's raw. But it's honest. You're telling the truth. Easy, and I want to help you do it. Ezra studied his twin, searching for a catch. You'll sign the release. Yeah, Ethan said. But I want more than that. I want us to be brothers again. The words hung between them, heavy with possibility and pain. Ezra wanted to believe him, but trust was a fragile thing, broken by years of silence. You didn't fight for me back then, he said quietly. Why now? Ethan leaned forward, his voice low. Because I'm not a kid anymore. I see what I did wrong. I let Mom and Dad control me, and I lost you because of it. I don't want to lose you again. Ezra's chest ached, but he pushed it down. It's not that simple. You can't just show up and erase 7 years. I know, Ethan said. But I'm here. I'm trying. They spent the day together, an uneasy truce forming as they walked through Golden Gate Park. Ethan asked about Ezra's life, his career, his friends. Ezra kept his answers guarded, but Ethan's curiosity felt genuine. When they passed a group of queer couples laughing on the grass, Ethan didn't flinch, and Ezra noticed. That evening, Javier invited them to a drag show at the community center. Ethan hesitated but agreed, and Ezra watched him closely, waiting for judgment. Instead, Ethan clapped along with the crowd, even laughing when a performer teased him from the stage. It was a small thing, but it chipped away at Ezra's defenses. Later, over beers, Ethan asked, "You and Javier, you're close?" Ezra shrugged, his face warming. "He's my best friend. Sometimes more. It's complicated." Ethan nodded, no trace of discomfort in his eyes. "He seems good for you." The conversation shifted to the script, and Ethan offered insights into their childhood, details Ezra had forgotten. They talked late into the night, and for the first time in years, Ezra felt a spark of the bond they'd once shared. But when Ethan signed the release form, handing it over with a quiet, "This is your story," Ezra felt a pang of guilt. Was he using his twin, just as his parents had used him? As Ethan left for his hotel, he paused at the door. "I'm proud of you. Easy. I hope you know that." Ezra didn't reply, but the words stayed with him, stirring a hope he wasn't ready to name. Back in Willow Creek, Margaret and Paul were relentless. Daily calls, voicemails dripping with false remorse, and even a letter arrived at Ezra's apartment, pleading for a meeting. They still hadn't signed the release, and the studio was growing impatient. Ezra's producer, Lena, warned him that without the signatures, the project could stall or worse, be scrapped. Ezra sat with Javier at a taqueria, picking at his food. "They're playing games," he said, frustration boiling over. "They think they can manipulate me into forgiving them." Javier's eyes narrowed. "They're scared. Your script's gonna expose them, and they know it. You hold the power now." Ezra nodded, but the weight of it was suffocating. He didn't want power. He wanted closure. The script was his way of reclaiming his story, but his parents' refusal felt like they were stealing it all over again. Javier reached across the table, his hand covering Ezra's. "You don't owe them anything. Not forgiveness. Not a second chance. Focus on what you've built here." Ezra squeezed his hand, grateful for the reminder. But when Ethan called later, asking to meet their parents together, Ezra's resolve wavered. "They're saying they'll sign if we both come," Ethan said. "I know it's a lot, but maybe it's a chance to end this." Against his better judgment, Ezra agreed. They met at a diner halfway between San Francisco and Willow Creek, a neutral ground that felt anything but. Margaret and Paul sat across from them, their faces a mix of hope and defensiveness. Ethan sat beside Ezra, a quiet show of solidarity. "We want to make this right," Margaret began, her voice trembling. "We've prayed on it, Ezra. We see now that we failed you." Ezra's laugh was bitter. "You failed me when you threw me out. You don't get to rewrite that with prayers." Paul's jaw tightened. "We're trying, Ezra. We're not perfect, but we're your family." Family doesn't disown their kid for being who they are, Ezra shot back. He slid the release forms across the table. "Sign these. That's all I need from you." Margaret's eyes welled with tears, but Ezra didn't flinch. Ethan's hand brushed his under the table, a silent reassurance. After a tense silence, Paul grabbed a pen and signed, his signature sharp and angry. Margaret followed, her hand shaking. As they left the diner, Ethan pulled Ezra aside. You okay? Ezra exhaled, the weight lifting slightly. Yeah. Thanks for being there. Ethan smiled, a flicker of their old connection. Always. Back in San Francisco, Ezra sent the signed forms to Lena. The script finally cleared for production. But the victory felt hollow. His parents' signatures were a legal win, not an emotional one. The real triumph was Ethan, standing by his side, proving that some bonds could survive even the worst betrayals. Production began, and Ezra's life became a whirlwind of meetings, rewrites, and set visits. The script was gaining buzz, with early screenings drawing tears and applause. But as the premiere approached, Ezra felt a growing unease. The story was his truth, but it was also his family's shame, laid bare for the world to see. Javier noticed the change in him. The way Ezra's smiles didn't reach his eyes. One night, as they lay tangled in bed, Javier traced a finger along Ezra's jaw. "You're carrying too much," he said softly. "Talk to me." Ezra stared at the ceiling, the city's hum filtering through the window. "What if I'm punishing them? The script, it's not just my story. It's Ethan's, too. And they'll hate me for it." Javier propped himself up, his gaze steady. "You're not punishing them. You're telling the truth. Ethan signed off because he gets that. Your parents, they don't get a say in your healing." Ezra pulled Javier closer, letting his warmth anchor him. "I don't know how to let go of the anger," he admitted. "You don't have to," Javier said. "Just don't let it define you." The next day, Ethan called, his voice bright. "I'm coming to the premiere. Wouldn't miss it." Ezra's heart lifted, but doubt lingered. Would Ethan feel exposed, seeing their lives on screen? Or would he see the love Ezra had woven into the story, the hope that they could rebuild? The premiere was held in a historic theater in San Francisco, the marquee glowing with the film's title, Out of the Shadows. Ezra stood in the lobby, Javier at his side, as industry insiders and queer activists filled the room. Ethan arrived, looking sharp in a suit, his fiancée, Clara, on his arm. She was kind, her smile genuine, and Ezra felt a pang of gratitude that Ethan had found someone who seemed to accept him fully. As the lights dimmed, Ezra's pulse raced. The film opened with Caleb's coming out, the raw pain of rejection mirrored by Ezra's own memories. He glanced at Ethan, whose eyes were fixed on the screen, glistening with unshed tears. When the film ended, the audience erupted in applause, and Ethan pulled Ezra into a fierce hug. "You did it," Ethan whispered. "It's beautiful." Ezra's throat tightened. "You're not mad." Ethan shook his head. "It's our story. And you told it right." The after-party buzzed with praise, but Ezra's mind was on Ethan. They stepped outside, the night air cool against their skin. "I was scared you'd hate it," Ezra admitted. Ethan smiled, his eyes soft. "I love you. Easy. This film, it's you taking back your power. I'm just glad I'm here to see it." The film's success was meteoric. Reviews called it a heart-wrenching triumph, and Ezra's name was suddenly everywhere. Invitations to speak at festivals and panels poured in, and Javier teased him about becoming a queer icon. But with the spotlight came a new challenge: his parents. Margaret and Paul had seen the film, invited by Ethan to a screening in Ohio. They called Ezra the next day, their voices a mix of pride and desperation. "We're so proud," Margaret said, as if she hadn't spent years erasing him. "We want to be part of this. Part of your life." Ezra's grip on the phone tightened. "You don't get to claim this. You signed the papers. That's where it ends." Paul's voice came through, gruff and insistent. We're your family. Ezra. We made mistakes. But we're here now. You're here because I'm successful. Ezra snapped. You didn't want me when I was just your son. He hung up, his hands shaking. Javier found him pacing the apartment, his anger spilling over. They think they can waltz back in because the world knows my name now, Ezra said. They don't get to do that. Javier pulled him into a hug, his voice steady. They don't. But you decide who gets to stay in your life. Not them. Ezra nodded, but the wound felt fresh again. He thought of Ethan, who'd stayed in touch, texting updates about his life and checking in on Ezra's. Their bond was fragile but growing, a bridge rebuilt one conversation at a time. Ezra didn't know if he could ever forgive his parents, but Ethan was different. Ethan was worth trying for. Weeks later, Ezra was invited to speak at a queer youth conference in Los Angeles. He stood before a room of teenagers, their faces a mix of hope and fear, and told his story, not just the pain, but the resilience. He spoke of Javier, who'd taught him to love himself, and Ethan, who'd reminded him that family could be chosen. The kids asked questions, their voices raw with their own struggles, and Ezra felt a purpose beyond the film. Afterward, a shy teen approached him, clutching a notebook. Your movie, it made me feel like I could survive, they said. Thank you. Ezra's eyes stung. This was why he'd written the script, not for revenge, but for kids like them. Kids like he'd been. A year later, Ezra stood on a balcony overlooking San Francisco Bay, Javier's arm around his waist. The city sparkled below, a testament to the life he'd built from the ashes of rejection. The film had won awards, but more importantly, it had sparked conversations, giving voice to countless queer kids who'd felt invisible. Ethan visited often now, their bond stronger than ever. He'd started volunteering at a queer youth center in Ohio, inspired by Ezra's work. Clara, his fiancée, had become a friend, her warmth a bridge between their worlds. Ezra's parents, however, remained a distant ache. They sent letters, left voicemails, but Ezra kept them at arm's length. Forgiveness wasn't owed. It was earned, and they hadn't yet. One evening, Ezra and Javier hosted a small gathering at their apartment. Ethan was there, laughing with Javier's friends, his ease a far cry from the nervous man who'd arrived in San Francisco a year ago. As the night wound down, Ethan pulled Ezra aside, handing him a small box. Open it, Ethan said, his eyes bright. Inside was a photo of them as kids, grinning in matching overalls, their arms slung around each other. On the back, Ethan had written, "To my brother, always." Ezra's throat tightened. You kept this. Never let it go, Ethan said. Just like I won't let you go again. They hugged, the years of pain not gone but softened by the promise of a future. Javier joined them, his hand finding Ezra's, and for the first time, Ezra felt whole not because of his success, but because of the people who chose to love him. As the city lights danced below, Ezra realized his story wasn't about revenge or even redemption. It was about survival, about building a family from those who saw him for who he was. His parents had begged for his signature, but it was Ethan's love, Javier's unwavering support, and his own resilience that had signed his name on a life worth living.